Record flooding, unbearable heat waves and severe droughts. How do we combat this extreme weather and environmental shifts to save the planet? Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu and this is The Heat. Four key climate indicators all set new records in 2021, according to a United Nations report. Climate change, increased temperatures, rising sea levels and loss of biodiversity have wreaked havoc on our planet.
We know what to do. The science has told us we have to end fossil fuels. We have to restore nature to its full glory. We have to transform our food systems. We have to make our cities green. We have to make them livable and no carbon. And we can do this as one people on this one earth.
Well, to discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. From Newark, Delaware, Saleem Ali is the Blue and Gold Distinguished Professor of Energy and the Environment at the University of Delaware and author of the upcoming book, Earthly Order: How Natural Laws Define Human Life. All royalties from the book will be donated to environmental literacy programs. From Arlington, Virginia, we're joined by Changhua Wu. She is the CEO of the Beijing Future Innovation Center. And we're also joined by Sweta Chakraborty. She is with us in Washington, D.C. She is the President of U.S. Operations for We Don't Have Time, a review platform for climate solutions. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Changhua Wu, let me start with you. This year's World Environment Day theme is Only One Earth, and the focus is on living sustainably in harmony with nature. President Xi Jinping sent a letter in which he said, since the 18th Congress of the Communist Party, we have put the construction of ecological civilization as the fundamental plan of China's sustainable development. We know that last year China saw some very serious flooding in the country. So what kind of proactive measures is the country taking to prevent a recurrence of this?
As you said, the top leadership in China has been championing the concept of ecological civilization, really mainstreaming the concept into not only the constitution of the country, but also the charter of the Communist Party there as well. So it's being used as the threat to unite everything together. So in reality, we cannot just talk about a concept. In reality, we have to deliver. I think there are a few data points probably illustrating how the country is putting the office actually moving forward. On one side, I think protecting nature is definitely at the core of the agenda. So the plan is already on the table. The target says, for instance, by 2025, at least a quarter of the land area in the country will be protected through national parks and also other conservation areas. And the second data point is that a quarter of the land mass in China, which are currently pretty much covered by desert, barren lands, Gobi, as well as wastelands, are becoming the largest renewable energy centers or bases at this moment there. And the laws, regulations are coming on board faster than before. For instance, on June the 1st, the first national wetland protection law became effective. So you started to see all the pieces coming together, the policy pretty much trying to drive, the actions, investment, and innovation on the ground. In the meantime, actually, the bottom-up part is moving forward as well. In a nutshell, I think China continues to face challenges, like you mentioned, the flooding, other natural disasters. But in the meantime, the country probably is making unprecedented efforts to move towards the clean energy transition and climate resilient future.
Sweta Chakraborty, in India, the Prime Minister there, Narendra Modi, he launched his, what he calls his Lifestyle for the Environment movement. Now, we know that India, Pakistan and Iraq, they saw heat waves, very intense heat waves caused by the use of fossil fuels. And in New Delhi, the capital of India, we've seen where landfills have caught on fire, spewing out fumes, which have caused air pollution in the capital there. So when we look at this program, how do you think it's going to be implemented?
This is the kind of thing that we need to see implemented, but it needs to be scaled up urgently. This is not going to be enough, nor are the pledges that we find ourselves barely able to see through as we're at that halfway point from COP26 to COP27, where we needed to be in between the COPs. And as Bonn, Germany kicks off tomorrow, so we're at COP26.5, we're at that halfway point between when the leaders from nation states around the world, including Modi from India, come and promise that they will make massive changes within their country to be able to align to the Paris Accords, which is limiting that limiting warming to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Some of these feel-good programs that are being put forward, suggesting that real action is being taken, is hardly the energy overhaul that is required to actually commit these countries to the pledges that were promised at COP26 and that need to be realized by COP27. The trajectory that we're on at this midpoint, at Stockholm Plus 50, at World Environment Day, at the start of Bonn, Germany, is still putting us on a path to reaching the minimum warming we want to experience by the end of the century, perhaps by 2030. So none of these measures are going to actually bring us to where we need to be.
So, Sweta, as you say, you've got these feel-good programs that are being introduced, but is there any way of accurately measuring what kind of success programs are having, and even the big resolutions that have been taken by the United Nations?
We need much more transparency, and we need real commitment by the nation states that have been historical polluters, the United States, U.S., India. These are the leaders of these countries need to step up and contribute and lead the pot of financial money to the countries that need to transform as well, but need the support. So we need to see real leadership and transparency from historical polluters, and we need financial support to those countries that would benefit from also getting on the train to this clean energy overhaul. It's not asking for a lot. $100 billion is nothing compared to the $451 billion in subsidies that are directly provided to oil and gas. That is the definition of insanity. Mm-hmm. We can redistribute that money towards overhauling countries' clean energy systems.
Right, I want to get to that in a moment. It seems a contradiction that, there's so much money being poured into subsidizing fossil fuels. But at this point, I want to bring into the conversation Leila Salazar-Lopez. She is the Executive Director of Amazon Watch. Leila, great to have you with us. And I want to talk about something that you will be very familiar with because you do work on this, and that is the rainforests. Now, we know how crucial rainforests are to the health of the planet, but we continue to see deforestation. Brazil is doing something. They've raised fines to protect the forests, but is that enough?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm calling in from Los Angeles, California, for the Summit of the Americas, and happy World Environment Day week to all. To answer your question, no, unfortunately, that is not enough. What is really truly needed at this time in Brazil, since deforestation has been doubling, in particular during the Bolsonaro administration, what's really needed at this time is permanent protection for the Amazon rainforest and all of the ecosystems across Brazil and the ecological basin of the Amazon. The best way to secure that permanent protection is to secure indigenous peoples' land rights, which are being threatened, that are being attacked, that are being grabbed, in particular over the last 3 years during the Bolsonaro administration. There has been an increase, a doubling of deforestation, fires, and attacks on indigenous peoples and traditional peoples' land rights, including even a threat to roll back the Constitution to take away indigenous people's lands, which are the best protected lands in the rainforest. Right. They're the best protected lands around the world. Actually, 80% of our global biodiversity is in indigenous people's lands. So we must secure the land rights of indigenous peoples to ensure that places like the Amazon are protected.
Leila, we have talked about this before, but there seems to be, the prevailing thinking is that, there has to be either measures taken against deforestation at the expense of economic development. I mean, is that an artificial argument? Can both be done?
Of course, what we need is balance. What we need is harmony. What we need is sustainability and regeneration, and a just transition to a new kind of economy that really does value nature, that really does value the balance of nature, which is what indigenous peoples and traditional peoples have been doing for thousands of years. There's a proposal, a call right now from indigenous peoples of the Amazon called the 80 by 2025 initiative. And the call is basically acknowledging that the Amazon is at a tipping point. It is at the point of ecological collapse because of all of these threats, because economic development has been prioritized over the protection of biodiversity and human rights and our climate, frankly. And so this proposal, this initiative called the 80 by 2025 initiative, Amazonia for Life, is saying that we need to permanently protect 80% of the Amazon by 2025. And that may sound like a grandiose and far-fetched idea, but that is actually not only what the indigenous peoples are saying, it's what scientists are saying, it's what the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, supports. And if we protected 100% of indigenous peoples' lands, we would get to that goal. And what would that really mean? It would be actually implementing protected areas and indigenous areas. It would be restoring those areas that have been degraded. It would be supporting economic development, women's projects, ecotourism. I mean, it would be stopping any further destruction.
Saleem Ali, great to have you with us on the show. Welcome to the show. The G7 climate ministers met last month and they agreed to phase out coal by 2035. In fact, the U.S. climate envoy, John Kerry, he put it very colorfully. He said, we are cooked if we do not phase out coal. And phasing out coal, of course, is also part of the COP26 goals. Where are we now in that effort to phase out coal in the United States?
Well, within the United States, I think we're on a better trajectory than many other countries because there's also been a lot of involvement from the private sector, recognition that this is important. There's been recognition from philanthropists like Michael Bloomberg, who's devoted a considerable amount of funds actually to help communities which are going to transition away from coal. The challenge is, the G7 versus also the G20, which is where I think the action is needed, because the G20 includes countries where the transition away from coal has been much less strident. And of course, that is partly out of necessity, because you do need baseload power generation for electricity delivery. And unless we have very large storage capacity for renewable energy, we need other sources of baseload power, and the only ones which are practical right now are either nuclear or fossil fuels. And so that has been a big problem in terms of the transition away from coal for countries where the demand is growing rapidly, as is the case in, of course, the more rapidly growing economies of Asia.
So, Saleem, do you see the effort to get alternative sources of energy catch up with the goal of phasing out coal?
Yes, eventually, but we will need to invest a lot in battery storage technologies particularly, and that's why efforts at developing these large giga factories to have battery storage is important. We should think creatively about hydropower and how we could also have large infrastructure which can store energy through hydropower. There are ways to do that too, but it requires a lot of investment. So I think there's going to be a need to invest in infrastructure, and tough choices will have to be made, because those batteries will require critical metals, for example, which will require extraction. And so there will need to be a give and take with the environmental community about balancing some impacts versus others.
Changhua, what about China's efforts to phase out coal by 2035? It's not that far away, 13 years away.
I don't think China has committed to phasing out coal by 2035, even though the country does have a plan to phase down coal in the coming decades there. So at this moment, in particular short term, and because of the disruption of the COVID, and now because of the war in Europe, and the coal definitely is coming back, and for the sake of the energy security and stability at this moment. But in the meantime, there's a very exciting side, is the unprecedented level of progress investing in renewable energy, alternative energies there. So for China, the story is not simply about coal, specific fuel. Rather, it's rebuilding or restructuring a new energy system. So within that system, coal probably will continue to have a certain level of role in the coming decades. But more and more, you started to see the ratio from non-fossil fuels, in particular renewable energy, at this moment, really gearing up to transform actually the energy system there. I think that's the most exciting part. Besides the fuel, and if you look at China's current plan in the landscape of the 14th five-year plan, we have pretty much made all the specific actions, the targets on the table in a systematic way. We talk about energy storage, we talk about grid infrastructure, and we talk about buildings, transportation, industry, power. So you started to see systematic transformation, I call it a clean energy transformation in this country ongoing now, even though facing all the difficulties or disruptions, around the world at this moment. Right. Short-term coal will continue to be there, but mid to longer term, I think definitely the transition, particularly from China perspective, is a much accelerated process.
All right, and Changhua, very briefly, what about the Chinese efforts against air pollution in the country? I mean, after India, China has very high levels of air pollution.
Well, compared to India, China definitely has been advancing much earlier, experiencing heavy air pollution. But today, if you look at air qualities actually in major parts of the country, the progress has been very obvious. People from Beijing, large cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and mid-sized, small-sized cities, their air quality measured by API has been dramatically improving, and pretty much along the track of the national plan. And the reason is that, of course, on one side, we've been facing down coal, but in the meantime, really tightening control in terms of prevention and control of air pollution from all the sources possible. So probably to a certain extent, India at this moment could look to China's experience and lessons and experience, and from that process to help think about how India could accelerate the process to tackle air pollution.
Sweta, what about India's efforts to clean up its air? I mean, it has some of the most polluted air in its cities, and I mean, India and China, I should point out, as Changhua pointed out to us as well, have not signed that effort to phase out coal by 2035.
It's air pollution, it's heat waves, it's so many impacts related to the planet warming that India is at the forefront of, being one of the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change. And yet it is not moving nearly fast enough and taking the lead and showing what countries can do to truly overhaul to clean energy. And we're going to continue to see more worsening conditions in human health related to air pollution. We're going to see insane heat waves where it's unsafe to be outside for any extended period of time. And this is exactly in line with what you would expect to see. The whole point of World Environment Day was to draw attention to biodiversity, the need to improve upon biodiversity, to restore the world's nature so we can live in a respectful situation with our natural environment. And it's to look at climate change, of course, to reduce the warming, and it's to address pollution. Pollution is resulting in human health impacts, not just with air pollution, but also in plastics. And this was a major theme of this World Environment Day. There is an island of plastic 3 times the size of France floating between Hawaii and California. And this plastic is making its way into our tap water. 83% of our tap water is being infiltrated by plastic, which is resulting in toxic levels in human blood. And so it is more evident than ever the relationship between pollution, climate change, and loss of biodiversity and our very well-being, our human well-being, and our global security. So yes, countries like India, China, U.S., Brazil need to open their eyes and act now and decisively. This is what we demand of our leaders.
Saleem Ali, the German economy and climate minister, Robert Habeck, he was very critical of current efforts to move away from fossil fuels. Let's listen to what he had to say.
It is already exhausting enough to stop climate-damaging behavior altogether and to convert the energy systems. But the fact that we are rewarding climate-damaging behavior with society's money, with everyone hard on euros, either through direct subsidies or through tax advantages, is absurd. And this absurdity must be stopped by 2025, according to the communiqué of all G7 countries.
So, Saleem, does the minister have a point there? I mean, Sweta brought the point up earlier on that the large amounts of money, billions of dollars, being used to subsidize fossil fuels right now.
Yes, I mean, the point is well taken, but I mean, Germany made some policy errors as well, which the minister should acknowledge, because, for example, they panicked after the Fukushima incident and they moved too rapidly away from nuclear power. And that actually has led to their dependence much more on fossil fuels during this transition period. So the point is well taken, but we need to have a systems perspective on this transition, which we have not had. And so we have made some rash decisions, oftentimes not looking at the full system's impact. And so that's going to be the challenge, because we do not currently have, for certain kinds of technologies, either the infrastructure, like with electric cars, we need far more rapid infrastructure development in order to have the kind of prevalence to reduce emissions. We need to have far more rapid development of these battery storage technologies to actually transition to solar and wind, where they can provide baseload power, which they cannot. So we are absolutely hamstrung. And so then governments have to subsidize. If they don't, no one will be able to afford their homes in winter. And the other irony is that a lot of the world actually lives in climates where in winter it is too cold to go outside and you need artificial systems of heating. So, I mean, this is the real challenge we have. We are warming the climate in order to heat our homes in winter because we did with errant planning when it came to our electricity delivery.
Leila, the Weather Channel reported from the United Nations Environment Programme, and I'm quoting here, it said the world population is inching towards 8 billion and we're using the equivalent of 1.6 Earths to maintain our current way of life. Naturally, ecosystems cannot keep up with our demand and as a result are fast declining. So human demand, as we can see, is causing the degradation of our ecosystems. How do we address that?
Well, similar to what I was saying earlier, we do have to live more in balance with nature. One specific way that one of the things that we need to do specifically as I sit here in California is reduce our fossil fuel intake, reduce our fossil fuel addiction, really. The oil from the Amazon, as we're talking about extraction and what we really need to do to transition away from fossil fuels and what we really need to do to put our planet and our climate back in balance is to stop extraction and really transition into renewable energy. And the oil from the Amazon, the majority of the oil from the Amazon that is exported is coming right here to California. It's going to fuel our cars and our transportation system. It's actually more than the oil from Saudi Arabia that's coming here to California. So even a place like California, which is known as a climate leader, is still contributing to the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. So what we really need to do is we need to, one, stop extracting so much. We're really out of balance with our extraction. Here in California, for example, we do need much better public transportation. We are beyond our carrying capacity here in California and around the world. And so we do need to bring that into better balance. Indigenous peoples are and other peoples that are on the front lines of the climate crisis, indigenous peoples and forest peoples and traditional peoples who are connected to the land, have a lot to share with us about how we can do things better, how we can balance not only our weather systems, but also our daily lives and how we live and how we not take so much from the planet, but we give back. And that's what we talk about when we talk about restoration and regeneration. And also really looking at women and the women's leadership at this time.
Okay.
Because women, yes.
Changhua, I've just got a couple of minutes left. As we look ahead to COP27, we know that that's in November. Many countries have not actually yet met their COP26 commitments. How big and how serious is that shortfall, that gap?
Huge, and it's enlarging, particularly because the system shocks we're experiencing now. Today we talk about we can blame leaders, basically saying you are still investing or incentivizing fossil fuels, but in the meantime, the delivery system for clean energy future is also disrupted, shocked by other geopolitical factors, wars among others there. So yes, on one side, I think scientists are telling us this sense of urgency. We are lagging behind, far behind, but at the same time, on the other side, we're supposed to deliver. We sort of know what to do, but somehow the system shocks continually disrupting or distracting, redirecting the resources. We talk about the investment in fossil fuels, but also if you look at the defense military budget, we're spending literally on weapons to kill people as well. So in a nutshell, this is a very bleaking point of time, and we need to think harder, trying to figure out how to get out of the situation.
Sweta, I've only got 30 seconds left. What is your sense of that 1.5 degree target? Is it going to be met?
We need to take urgent action to change the trajectory we're on right now, because since COP26, we've increased our carbon emissions and we are firing up coal fire plants. We're going in the opposite direction and we don't have time for that.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for being with us. We need to leave it there. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.